Hello and welcome back. I'm Spencer Reese, militarymoneymanual.com. Today, we're talking about what if I was to start over? Someone on Instagram reached out to me and said, hey, Spencer, what if you were to start over today as a young officer in the U.S. Air Force? How would you invest? How would you save? How would you approach your money with everything that you've learned since serving for 12 years on active duty, and now I've been a veteran for 4 years? So what a great question. I was commissioned in 2010. So the officers who are commissioning now were about 7 years old when I was commissioned. Thanks, guys. Way to make me feel old. Many officers commissioning today are born after September 11th, which I can remember vividly. It's a great question, and I'm going to speak to it from the angle of I was a military officer, right? So I commissioned through Air Force ROTC. I served 12 years of active duty. But everything I'm going to talk about is also applicable on the enlisted side as well, except for very few specific niche topics like the career starter loan. So the 5 things that I would say right off the top are you want to open up a bank account at a military-friendly bank. You want to get a spending tracking app. Number 2, you want to set up an emergency fund in a high-yield savings account, HYSA. And this can be at any of the high-yield savings account places like American Express or Ally or CIT Bank. It doesn't really matter. Just somewhere else other than where you have your military-friendly bank. You can also just have your emergency fund at USAA or Navy Federal as well. It doesn't really matter. But it can help you feel a little bit better if you've got $10,000 just sitting there, if it's earning, 3 or 4% versus less than 1%. Number 3, make sure that you've got 5% going into your Roth TSP, and that your thrift savings plan is set up to be in the lifecycle fund that makes the most sense for you, probably the L2075 fund if you've just joined the military and you're listening to this now. Number 4, pay off your debts. And then number 5, start building your savings rate. And that can be a slow build. It doesn't have to jump immediately to 30, 40, 50% or anything crazy like that. You can just start with maybe 15% into your Roth TSP. And that's going to grow as you promote, as you have more time in service, and your paycheck just naturally grows. So let's break it down, and we'll talk about all those 5 points in detail, and I'll add a couple more points as well, some more color in there as well. I think one thing that I would really want to emphasize for the new military service member, whether you're an officer, whether you're enlisted, is it's hard to know who to trust. It's hard to know who's giving good advice, whose advice you should follow. It's easy to fall into day trading schemes or TSP seasonal investing schemes. There's lots of Facebook groups out there that seem like, they're beating the average annual returns of the C fund because they're moving in and out of the G and the C and the S fund. And that's all fine. But just remember that everybody has an angle. I think that's a good place to start. And what works for somebody might not necessarily work for you. And so it's important to just, when you're getting started, to read around a bit and start to see, okay, who can you trust and who should you be following? And I think another trap that a lot of people fall into is, they talk to senior officers or senior NCOs, and they might say, oh, you got to buy real estate. You got to use your VA loan. Every time you PCS, you should be buying a property. And that might have worked when they were younger and had just commissioned or just enlisted, but the market's changed, right? Like the 6 or 7% interest rates are very common now. And so I think that it's important to recognize that they might have good intentions giving you this advice, but it's important to recognize that maybe the situation's different and maybe your situation's different. Maybe you don't want to own real estate. You don't want to be a long distance landlord. Especially on the real estate front, treat it like a business, run the numbers, make sure it makes sense before you just jump into it. Real estate isn't a magical wealth building machine any different than just investing in a low cost, automated, diversified, simple index fund in your TSP is. And just recognize too that, especially online, everybody has an angle. Like, for example, my angle is credit cards. I have affiliate relationship with the credit card company. So if you sign up for a credit card through my website, I'll earn a small commission. So I might talk about credit cards more than other people because I have an economic incentive to. I think Morgan Housel or Warren Buffett, one of those two, said, show me the incentives and I'll show you the behavior. When people are incentivized to do something, they tend to do that thing. So when you're online and you're, reading, hey, this guy is selling this course, or just recognize that everybody has an angle, and it's better to try to figure out what people's angle is and then just take everything that they say with a grain of salt, recognizing that they have an angle. So when you first join, education is the most important thing at this stage. You want to start building the systems, you want to start your journey. And I think another thing that if I was going to go back and do it a little bit differently, is I would document my wins and mistakes. I would write down, hey, this thing worked really well for me, this thing was a complete failure, and just kind of keep a journal, maybe like a financial education journal of articles I read or books I've read or podcasts I listened to that kind of formed my investing philosophy and how I approach money. Okay, so to get into the nitty gritty, I've got a couple points here, but number one is open up an account at a military-friendly bank. So this is your USAA, your Navy Federal Credit Union, Pentagon Federal, it was another popular one. A lot of these banks will pay you a business day early, and it's kind of a wash, right? Whether you get paid on the 1st or the 15th or the 31st and the 14th, it's still 2 weeks apart. But psychologically, I don't know, it just feels a little bit better to get paid a business day early. The other nice thing about banking with a military-friendly bank is if there's a government shutdown, a lot of times USAA, Navy Federal will offer interest-free loans. Hopefully that doesn't come into play, but it can. These banks also are very online friendly, and a lot of times they employ veterans and they have a very good understanding of military life. So if you have an ATM withdrawal in Oklahoma one day and then the next day you have a credit card transaction in Japan, they understand that that's what military life is like. Sometimes you just got to pick up and go, and it's not exactly the same as civilian life. Okay, number two, this is more applicable to officers. I would say for the Career Starter loan, take it, but only if you need to buy a vehicle or have a little bit of cash to get to your first training base or duty station. Now, I took the Career Starter loan and I invested it for 1.5 years while I was in university. And then when I graduated, I had student loan debt that was over 6% interest rate, and I used my 3% Career Starter loan to pay off the 6% student loans. And so that effectively refinanced my student loans down to 3% from 6%. If you are graduating and you don't have student loans, which is probably applicable to most of the people coming out of the military service academies, or if you had a full ride ROTC scholarship, or if you're gone through OCS and you don't have, or you already paid off your student loans, or you never had student loans, take the Career Star loan if you need it. But a lot of times I see people wanting to take it out and invest it, and they're like, oh, it's a no-brainer. You can borrow at 0.75% and invest it in the U.S. stock market and get 10%. But if you actually run the numbers over a long period of time, it's not quite that good. So in this example, scenario A, let's say you borrowed and invested $36,000, which is the military academy, U.S. Air Force Academy, West Point, Naval Academy. You can borrow, if you're graduating one of those service academies, you can borrow $36,000 at 0.75% return. And if you take the money, you invest it, and it grows at 7% annual return, over 5 years, you'll have $51,000. Now, if you, rather than just borrowing and investing, if you just invested the payments, so instead of making the about $600 a month payments, instead of making them to the bank, you just set aside $600 a month, you would end up with $43,700. So $51,000 if you borrow and invest a lump sum and then pay off the loan. And if you just invest the payments, your net worth at the end of that would be or your investment value would be $43,700. So it's about a $8,000 difference there. That's over 5 years. Now, if you look over 40 years and you kept, let's say you borrowed and invested, you'd have about $590,000. Whereas if you just invested the payments for 5 years, $600, and then you stopped investing, you'd have about $500,000, $500,000. So there's a $90,000 difference. That's for after 40 years, you got to recognize. And so, what does that break down to? About $2,000 a year? Are you really going to notice that over your lifetime? Probably not. So for everybody who says, yes, I borrowed it and I invested, and that's great if you want to do that, but don't feel like you're missing out on very much if you don't do that. I would say the Career Star loan is there. If you're graduating university or you're graduating the service academy, you need some cash to get yourself started. at your first duty station or you need to buy a car, there's a lot of expenses when you get to your first duty station. You might have to put first month's rent, security deposit. You might have to buy furniture for the first time in your life. You might have to get a car. And a lot of that stuff might be reimbursed, like your PCS expenses, but it's still good to have cash so you don't have to go into credit card debt or you don't have to borrow money from another source. So again, use the Career Star loan if you need the cash. Otherwise, skip it and just invest the payments would be my advice if I was starting over. Okay, number 3, start contributing a 5% to your Roth TSP. So log into MyPay, get access to MyPay. I guess that would be the first thing there. And then, make sure you're contributing 5% into your Roth TSP. The 5% match won't kick in until you've been in for 24 months. So in the 25th month, it'll start. But you can also bump that up. You can do 10%, 15%. When I commissioned, I had $1,000 a month of student loan payments I had to make. And so I was barely contributing to any of my retirement accounts. I was just trying to survive. And that might be your situation as well. But I would say just start contributing 5% minimum to your Roth TSP so that when you do hit that 2-year mark, you'll start getting the 5% match automatically and you won't miss out on any of it. Also, go to tsp.gov and create your thrift savings plan, your TSP account, and then log in and make sure that you're in the lifecycle fund that's appropriate to your age. Probably the latest one, like the lifecycle 2075 fund, is a good place to start. Okay, next, what I would do is I would open up a Roth IRA at Schwab, Fidelity, or Vanguard, and I would start investing in the Vanguard Total World Stock Index Fund. So it's VT, it's an ETF, exchange traded fund, and again, it's Victor Tango. I would just throw it all into there to get started and reassess later in life if that's an appropriate strategy for me. But you just want to start doing something. And Roth IRA this year, $7,500 limit. It changes every year. So just Google what's the Roth IRA limit this year. Most of the banks or the brokerage firms, Schwab, Fidelity, and Vanguard, they'll have a little tracker app in their app that'll tell you how much you can contribute in a year. And that's a great option for newly enlisted or newly commissioned military service members because your income is probably the lowest it's going to be your entire life. So I'd still stick to a low-cost, automated, diversified, simple, a LADS investing strategy. And you could do, there's so many different strategies out there. You could do all US, so just the S&P 500 with the C fund. You could do the total US stock market, C fund plus S fund. You could add in international with the I fund inside your TSP. The Bogleheads 3-fund portfolio, that's 33%, a third US stock. That would be CNS fund in the TSP, a third international shares, so that would be the I fund, and then a third bonds. I think that's a bit too much bonds for the newly enlisted military service member or commissioned officer. So I would say, the total global market allocation at the moment is 65%, approximately 65% US, 35% international. But that's a pretty good place to start. So maybe like a 60-40 US international split. Maybe you want to favor the US a little bit more. So you do like 80% US, 20% international. It doesn't really matter as long as you're not changing your asset allocation every month or even every year. You want to pick something that you can stick to for 5, 10 years, and you can reevaluate along the way, especially as you learn new information. I definitely wouldn't recommend bonds to anyone building wealth in the military in their 20s or 30s. I didn't have a meaningful bond allocation until I was nearly 40, and the lifecycle fund keeps you at a 1% allocation of bonds until you're well into your 40s. So that seems reasonable to me. Favor stocks much more, shares of companies much more than bonds early in your investing career. And then once you've kind of made it, you can take some chips off the table, so to speak, and move some of your asset allocation into bonds. Okay, number 6 of my list here, emergency fund. So I would still build an emergency fund. I would make sure that I had cash set aside. Initially, I think $1,000 is still a good number. I would try to build that up rapidly, like saving, $100, $200 a paycheck, maybe $500 a month, and try to get it up to like $5,000. I think that's still a pretty good number to cover like any car repairs or any kind of like emergency plane ticket at home. And maybe eventually kind of get that number up to like $10,000. I think it was a pretty good cushion. But it also depends on your lifestyle too. I've talked to lots of people that don't have emergency funds, but they have their financial system so dialed in that they don't really need to have that cash sitting there. I think for the vast majority of people, especially when you're getting started, just have the cash sitting there. You'll quickly realize that because you've built this automatic system and because you've set aside savings, it just seems like you have a lot less emergencies when you have an emergency fund. Okay, number 7, if you just joined the military and you're stationed in a no income tax state, or at any point in your career, you're stationed in a no income tax state, I would go ahead and change your state of legal residency to that state. So currently there's 8 US states that impose no state income tax. That's Alaska, Florida, Nevada, New Hampshire, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, and Wyoming. So there's lots of military bases in Alaska, Florida, and also if you're home of record, if you commission or enlist or you come from any of these states, then just keep these states as your state of legal residency. And don't conflate. Home of record is where you were when you enlisted or commissioned, and it's not the same as your state of legal residency. It's very difficult to change your home of record. It's usually only if there's been a clerical error. But state of legal residency, you can change that every year if you wanted to. I don't recommend that, but you could. So Alaska, Florida, Nevada, New Hampshire, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Wyoming. So I know there's bases, Air Force bases in Wyoming, Army, Air Force in Alaska. There's Navy in Florida, plenty of Air Force bases in Nevada. New Hampshire, probably not as many, but definitely some Guard Reserve stuff up there. South Dakota, I know there's bases there. Army bases in Tennessee, Texas, and I know there's Air Force bases in Wyoming as well. So all of these places you probably have the potential to be stationed in at some point. I was stationed in Texas when I first joined the military, and I changed my state of legal residence to Texas. So all you have to do is file a DD Form 2058 with your finance office. And essentially, it just changes your state of legal residency. And then you'll see that updated on your LES, your leave and earnings statement inside MyPay. And then that will change your state tax withholding so that if you're in a no income tax state, then you won't have state tax withholding. So I was a proud resident of the state of Texas for my 12 years of active duty. And then I left. And at the time, I was in Hawaii. So I became a resident of the state of Hawaii at the time that I left. Okay, number 8, set a reasonable but not an unsustainable savings rate. The money will build up a lot faster than you think. So I think I kind of got obsessed early on. I had a lot of student loan debt. I graduated about $60,000 of student loan debt, and it took my wife and I just under 5 years. By the time we left, I did 2 years of pilot training and then 3 years at my first duty station. By the time I left my first duty station after about 5 years, we had bought and sold a condo during the 3 years at my first duty station and made about $40,000 profit. And we were able to use that to pay off the remainder of my student loans. And then we also had accumulated an auto loan as well while we were there. So we were debt free after about 5 years of active duty. And during that time, I had 3 deployments, so that really helped as well. And we have a whole episode on, how to maximize your savings and investing and wealth building while you're on military deployment. So go check that episode out. But I think that being reasonable and not unsustainable is really important. So you might read some FIRE, Financial Independence, Retire Early blogs like Mr. Money Mustache, or even my own site. And sometimes they're talking about like these insanely high savings rates of like 50% or whatever. And yes, if that's sustainable for you, then that's great, right? Like you can be financially independent just based off of a 50% savings rate in 17 years, starting from 0. But if that's not sustainable for you and you want to be living a lifestyle that's enjoyable, right? And like I said, is sustainable. One thing that is hard to recognize, especially when you're in the early stages of saving and investing, is just a 10, 15, 20% savings rate, that builds wealth very fast because your income grows pretty fast in the first 10, 15 years after you join the military. And even if you get out after just one enlistment or one tour of service and you go to the civilian world, your income will probably keep growing. And so you don't want to set a savings rate that's too high. And I think how you can tell that you've got too high of a savings rate or you're paying off debt maybe too aggressively is if you start saying no to things that you don't really want to say no to. So I always give the example, when I was a lieutenant, my buddies went on a skiing trip And I just looked at my budget and I was like, no, I can't afford that because of X, Y, and Z. I'm paying off student loans. I'm trying to max out my Roth IRA. And guess what? Like today, here I am, almost 40 years old, and I can easily max out my Roth IRA every year. And now all my buddies have kids and we don't do ski trips anymore. So I think just the point there is make sure that you are saying yes to the things you want to say yes to. And even if that if I could go back in time, and instead of maxing out my Roth IRA that year, just go on that ski trip and spend $1,000 or $2,000, whatever it would have cost to go on that ski trip, I would 100% do that. So I would just encourage you to make sure that the number on the screen, your net worth, it matters, but it doesn't matter as much as relationships and friendships and awesome experiences. And I think for a lot of people, achieving financial independence is actually the worst thing that can happen to you, because now you'll have all the time and resources in the world to confront who you really are. And you can't blame anything else or anyone else anymore for your failures or inadequacies. It's on you to fix them. You've got the time, you've got the resources, and you can't, just say okay, well, after this deployment, I'll work on paying off my debt or building a better relationship with my kids or with my spouse or my family, or I'm going to get in shape, or I'm going to lose that weight, whatever it is. Once you achieve financial independence, it's okay, what are you waiting for? When are you going to do it? You say you want to write a book. When are you going to write that book? You said that you're going to run a marathon. When are you going to run that marathon? Just make sure that along the path to financial independence, and you can read stuff from the Mad Scientist and from Mr. Money Mustache, and a lot of these early guys and gals that achieved financial independence very early in their 30s and 40s, and even 50s. And almost all of them sound very lost for the first couple of years. And I think that it's important to recognize that if you get to that finish line and you're so excited to be financially independent, just make sure that you didn't sacrifice too much along the way of who you are and who you want to be and the people that you want around you and the things that you want to do.
Just a quick note from one of our sponsors, and we'll be right back to the show. Hey, Spencer, I've heard about this free Amex Platinum card for military service members. Where can I go to learn more about this?
Great question, Jamie. I've got the Ultimate Military Credit Cards course at militarymoneymanual.com/UMC3. It's a 100% free email-based course, and I explain exactly how to verify your eligibility for credit card annual fee waivers with the Military Lending Act, or MLA, and the Service Member Civil Relief Act, or SCRA. The Ultimate Military Credit Cards course is a beginner's guide to travel hacking and opening up your first annual fee-waived credit card while you or your spouse serves in the U.S. military. There's no spam, no fluff, and the only emails you'll get from me are related to military credit cards. You can unsubscribe at any time, and there's zero cost to you to sign up. You can sign up right now for free at militarymoneymanual.com/UMC3. Again, militarymoneymanual.com/Uniform Mike Charlie 3.
And now back to the show.
Okay, so number 10, if I only had one book to read, I would read the Military Money Manual. So I know that's a bit of a cop-out. It's the book that I wrote, but I literally wrote it for the young service member, enlisted officer. It doesn't matter. You can read it in about 2 to 3 hours. You can read it in a Saturday afternoon, and it lays out exactly what you need to do to build wealth while you're in the military. And that's why I wrote it. I wrote it as a letter to my younger self. It's available on Amazon. It's available on my website, militarymoneymanual.com/book. So if I only had one book to read, that's the one that I would read if I could go back in time, because I consolidated everything that worked for me and everything that I learned about money management, about personal finance, about investing while I'm in the military. And look, it's not rocket science. It's pretty simple, but it's not easy. You got to set up the systems. You got to make the hard choices, and you got to have a savings rate that's higher than your peers. That's the book that I would read if I could recommend one book to my younger self. If I was going to start over, is the Military Money Manual, A Practical Guide to Financial Freedom. If I was going to read a couple more books, these are the ones I would recommend. So I would read I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi and The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. Those are two very fundamental books that will give you some great stories, some great practical advice, And really, especially I Will Teach You to Be Rich will really help you set up the automatic systems. And then Psychology of Money will really just kind of give you just a tremendous understanding of investing psychology and how to build wealth in the real world. And then if you want to like deep dive into investing, I would read 3 core books and then in this exact order. So The Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins, The Little Book of Common Sense Investing by John Bogle, and then A Random Walk Down Wall Street by Burton Malkiel. So that's moving from the simplest to the most technical and math driven. So The Simple Path to Wealth, I mean, it can basically be summarized as invest in the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund, which is VTSAX or VTI, and just do that at a high savings rate until you have 25 times your annual expenses. And congratulations, you're financially independent, and then move to, add a little bit of bonds and you're done. The Little Book of Common Sense Investing essentially explains with math and some stories about why passive index fund investing beats active management and like why I never talk about stock picking on the podcast. And then A Random Walk Down Wall Street kind of emphasizes the theme of you can't pick stocks, it's impossible. So just buy the entire market and accept the average return. And actually you'll do better than 80%, 90% of the investors out there. Once you become a millionaire, which on the officer side could probably happen in the first 10 to 15 years, depending on your savings rate. On the enlisted side, probably about the time you're ready for military retirement, that you can build $1 million net worth. I would read Die with Zero. So it's just a reminder that yes, you did all the savings and investing, and that's great. And now you're financially independent, you can live, or you're a millionaire, you can live the life that you want to live, but just recognize that life is short. And if you keep saving and investing, when's the party? When are you actually going to take some of the money that you earned and saved and invested in the wealth that you built, and when are you going to spend it on the people and things that matter the most to you? And if you're lucky enough to get married, the book I would recommend there is Money for Couples by Ramit Sethi. Or even if you're in a long-term relationship or you want to be in a long-term relationship, Money for Couples by Ramit Sethi. Very helpful to understand your and your spouse's money scripts, those kind of invisible ideas that you pick up during childhood. And what tends to happen is, right, in every relationship, there's a saver and there's a spender. And it's like, okay, why? Why does that happen? And how can we understand each other? And how can we play to each other's strengths and cover each other's weaknesses and be the best partners that we can be? So that's Money for Couples by Ramit Sethi. And then finally, number 13 on my list of things that I would do if I was starting over today, I'd listen to more podcasts and audiobooks when I was commuting. So I started doing this probably, 5 years into active duty. I had an hour-long commute to McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey, an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening. And I started listening to podcasts and audiobooks. And as it was, it's amazing. That's 10 hours a week of content, of education that you can get. I mean, that's basically an entire college, university class in a month. And then you can just keep doing that for 12 months a year. And listening to music's great, right? Like I'm not knocking it. It's a joyful part of life. But when you're young or old, follow your curiosity. Listen to world-class experts talk about topics that are interesting to you and learn from them. And it's incredible, everything that you can pick up from just, some of that dead time that you spend commuting, or if you're flying around the world, listen to more podcasts, listen to more audiobooks. I spent a lot of time just listening to music when I was younger in the car. And I think a lot of that was enjoyable, but some of it was also just like killing time. And I wish that I had spent more of that time listening to podcasts and audiobooks. Okay, so 3 great free resources I'm going to leave you with. I have the free Ultimate Military Investing course on my website. Just go to militarymoneymanual.com. There's a green button there. It says free investing course. Click on that and you can put your email in, and then I'll email you. It's just 5 emails and no spam. Unsubscribe anytime you want. But it just basically lines out how you should think about investing while you're in the military and the different order of operations you should go through. Speaking of order of operations, we have the financial order of operations for military. That's militarymoneymanual.com/FOO, FOO, FOO. There's a Money Guys podcast. They made a financial order of operations, but we set it up for the military. And I'll just run through that really quick. So step number 1 is get your Roth TSP 5% match. Step number 2, pay off high interest debt. Number 3, emergency fund. Number 4, max out your Roth IRA. Number 5, max out your Roth TSP. Number 6, contribute to a taxable brokerage. Number 7, start prepaying future expenses. Number 8, pay off low interest debt. And then number 9, achieve financial independence and retire early. So that's just kind of if you're like stuck or you're wondering like, okay, what do I do with my money next? Like I'm maxing out my Roth IRA. It's like, okay, go back and max out your Roth TSP. And it's like, okay, now I've maxed out my Roth TSP. What now? Okay, start throwing money into your taxable brokerage and building up that flexible savings that you have in there for your gap fund, between military retirement, if you're lucky enough to earn that or unlucky enough. And then finally, the third free resource is the military finance community on Reddit. We have over 50,000 people on there, and we have a Military Money 101, the prime directive, the flow chart. It updates monthly, and it just kind of walks you through, again, what to do with your money when. And step 1, bank accounts, budgeting app, reducing expenses, setting goals. Step number 2, emergency fund. Step number 3, 5% into your TSP. Step number 4, pay off debts. And then step number 5, start maxing out your retirement accounts. It also has a couple things, about combat zones and insurance as well on there. So that is what I would do if I was starting over. Let me know if you got any questions. Reach out to me on Instagram at Military Money Manual. Leave a comment on Spotify. Leave a review on Apple. We've got almost 150 reviews over at Apple. Pretty excited about that. Or reach out directly, podcast at militarymoneymanual.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Military Money Manual podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps others find the show, and we really appreciate it. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
The views and opinions presented here are those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the views of the DoD or its components. Reference to any commercial products or services does not constitute DoD endorsement of those products or services.